Hello, friends, and welcome to The Dark Side of the Word, a podcast for all the dark story lovers. I'm Kate, and I'm here with my amiable co-host, CJ.
Hi, everybody.
And today is the third Thursday of the month, which means that we are going to be talking about industry trend or a technical thing, all the sorts. And I'm so happy because today I'm handing it entirely off to CJ.
Because I stupidly volunteered to take the reins on this one, and now that we are in the midst of recording, I am regretting it.
Well, you just had to understand what the work I did for us and the effort I put in.
I do understand the work that you did, because not that I thought it was easy making a whole script up, but for some reason I thought it was going to be easier than it actually was, and it took me until like the 9th hour to get this finalized. So yes, I fully admire you even more than I did before for all the hard work that you're doing.
Well, it's going to be way more research than anything I've put together for us. So I'm going to look bad because I wanted to go on a rant on last month's technical and I failed miserably. My research was shit. And then I read her script for this and I was just like, I'm going to go in the corner now and cry. And I'm fired.
You are forgetting that I am an English lit major, so, like, constructing something is, like, my bread and butter, so.
See, I'm a retired engineer, and so we are all about, the rounding. The
rounding like, of numbers?
Yeah, we round, or close enough, approximations.
Oh, yeah, that's just death in my world.
Yeah, so we're just like, oh, yeah, so I heard this, and blah, 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 blah. Where's your citation? What's a citation?
Oh my God. Yeah. The English major in me and the IP, not lawyer, but IP consultant person in me. It's just like facts. We got to back everything up with facts. We need to know exactly what we're talking about.
Oh no, I lock the thin line of everything I need to do. What can I do without like having to say anything? Like what can I get away with? That is me. That is me.
I'm just anal retentive in the point of research. So yes. Okay.
So what are we talking about today, CJ?
Okay, so today I want to talk about the genre of women's fiction, specifically the name and the term, thank you, women's fiction. So why, you may ask, are we talking about women's fiction on a dark book podcast? Shouldn't we be talking about,
why
ghosts?
Are we, CJ?
I told Kate she has to put filler comments in here to make it seem like I'm not reading from something, and she's doing a very excellent job. So, we're a dark book podcast. We should be talking about ghosts and serial killers and stalkers and deep dark secrets that can tear families apart. And, before the past few years, I would have said yes, that there's very little overlap between women's fiction and horror. But I sincerely believe that is starting to change now. So a recent Guardian article that Kate, actually, you sent to me.
I was wondering when I saw that. I was like,
yeah, that was from you.
Stealing from me?
So what? See, you put the research in. You definitely do. You just do it for other people's discussions.
Okay.
So thank you for that. So anyway, a recent Guardian article mentioned that, quote, horror fiction is, which is pretty awesome.
The other thing that I saw was that they had the London Book Fair roughly a month ago. Yes. There's my citing of the facts.
Oh, London Book Fair.
One of the trends that was coming out of the London Book Fair as well was the fact that, not horror specifically, but dark stories. I think they did name kind of like what you're going to talk about here. I'm not going to spoil it. But more of the darker storylines or the trend and what's getting bought and what's getting sold is, not specifically horror, but just dark in general.
Dark.
Like they want more of the sinister plots, the murders, the struggles and everything. And they were saying it as a scary thing, and I'm just like, yes, it's our turn.
Our turn. Finally, the dark people can come out of the shadows.
I'm here. Hit me. Hi. Also, I'm the problem.
Well, it's about time. Rom-coms and things like that have had so many moments. It's time for the darker side of fiction to have more of the spotlight. I am all for that.
That's a whole nother psychological discussion of why it's the dark fiction coming out now. We won't get on that, but that's like a whole nother, that doesn't look good for us.
No, I mean, tis dark times in many ways, but that, as you said, that's an entirely different episode. I feel like that's an entirely different podcast as well. But okay, anyway, back onto our topic. So the article went on to talk about how this growth is due to the fact that the horror genre has undergone some kind of metamorphosis, departing from that classic horror style that writers such as Stephen King are usually doing to include more nuanced personal topics like Kate was saying. And I have definitely noticed it too lately, based on what I'm reading. And also I follow a lot of horror bookstagrammers, namely Spookish Mommy is one and Mother Horror on Instagram. They're both really good with recommendations. So horror has been broadened to include themes of psychological horror, grief horror, body trauma, folklore and fairy tales, monsters and myths, and in turn, many of these themes embrace storylines centered around women and their struggles. So some good examples are pregnancy and motherhood, which to me sounds absolutely terrifying just in and of itself, being pregnant and giving birth. But there's that book, The Push, that came out, I think, a few years ago that could be considered horror. There's also physical, mental, or emotional abuse. A good example would be My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon, and I would argue that My Dark Vanessa would be a horror type of novel.
Can we go back? Why does anyone want to read pregnancy horror?
I don't know.
Like, are we talking, like,
I haven't read them, so I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so are you thinking, like, the birth is the horror?
There's the birth, but there's also, I guess there's some delusions while being pregnant, fears about being a good mother. So the horror is if you're going to be a good mother, if this baby is what you want.
Okay, I would never classify that as horror, first off. Because, no. But I'm confused. Who wants to read that?
I don't know, but there's a lot of them coming out. There were a couple books that I was going to pick for my October spooky reads list this past year, and two of them were around motherhood and also grieving, which is another part of it. But they were specifically around motherhood and pregnancy. And I was like, I don't know if I'm really wanting to do that one right now.
Because I have a book. I'm not going to tell you which book.
Okay.
Because it's a book I'm writing, but I'm just saying, I'm not going to tell you which book. There's a miscarriage in a book of mine at some point that I will write. And I'm like, now is that pregnancy horror? Well,
I don't know. It's just I don't think it's maybe it is kind of a motif these days. I'm definitely seeing it pop up more. I know.
Oh, wait. No one's seeing me make a face. I'm sorry.
No one's seeing you make a face.
I'm giving a stank face. I'm like, what? No, I'm just.
Well, you'll like this next one. So
okay.
Another nuanced area of horror is general female rage over topics like madness and gaslighting, women's sexuality, misogyny, oppression, sexism. An example would be The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And then also, you are going to love this, Kate, Poor Things by Alistair Gray was named by Mother Horror as a gothic horror fairy tale. And you hated that, and you said it was horrific. So There's that crossover between the women's fiction and the horror right there.
It's horror. If you listen to the previous podcast, Poor Things is horror. Yeah. But also, you made another comment.
Okay.
And now I got distracted by the Poor Things comment, and now it's just out the window. Why would you do this to me?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, we're going to come back to this. Because it was a really good point. And Poor Things just took it right out of my head.
Poor Things. You get too excited. It happens.
I don't think excited is the right word to use in conjunction with Poor Things. Go ahead.
That's true. So my point is that there's definitely a market for women's fiction mixed with horror. And I am here for it. Right now, I am writing a book that is women's fiction and horror at the same time. It's a blend of supernatural stuff and a journey of two women, actually. So I want to start by defining what is women's fiction, because a lot of people have misconceptions about this. Yes, Kate, I see you raising your hand. Yeah.
Can we, before you were talking about the Poor Things, what was the other examples you were giving?
Okay, we're still on this one.
Yeah, I have to figure this out.
Okay, The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James.
No, right before that. What was that area?
We were talking about pregnancy and motherhood.
Right after, between the Simone St. James.
Physical, mental, or emotional abuse.
See, that's what I needed. Okay.
Would you like to weigh in on emotional abuse?
I would like to weigh in as a side caveat, please, may I?
Yes.
Okay, so I like that is a theme that's popping up. Mm-hmm. However, I just want to give a little warning to our writer listeners is please, for the sake of, oh God, do your research before you throw emotional abusive terms or actions in a book. Because I am sick and tired of people misdoing gaslighting. Please, for God's sake in hell, I want to burn every book that does it wrong, because from someone who comes from a very gaslit background, I'm not okay with that. So, let's stop throwing the word around. Do your research. Okay, thank you.
You've all been warned. You heard it right here. She's going to come after you. Don't put your full address in any comment sections.
I'm so over it, because you watch these housewife shows on Bravo and they just throw around like the word bullying and gaslighting and all this bullshit, and I'm just sitting here saying you're taking the hardcore meaning of the word out of use, and you're abusing the word, taking it from people who really need to use the word. So just do your research, friends and listeners, and then we continue. Okay, I'm surprised. Poor Things, that's how bad Poor Things was. It just took that rant right out of my head.
It did. That's because it struck a chord. It was a trigger for you.
We're never mentioning Poor Things again. We've given it way too much airtime.
Okay. No more Poor Things. Okay. So let's go back to talking about women's fiction. So, what is women's fiction? So this definition is paraphrased from the website Women's Fiction Writers Association, of which I am a member.
Look at her citing again.
So, women's fiction is a story about the main character's emotional journey toward a more fulfilled self, regardless of the main character's gender, although it's usually a woman. So, for example, the driving force of a romance novel would be a love story. For a mystery, it's the exposure of an event. And for a thriller, it's a fear-inducing chase or escape. Whereas women's fiction is driven by the main character's emotional journey and or his or her relationships with others, platonic, familiar, or romantic. It doesn't always have to be romance.
You're already cancel culturing women's fic in that description.
What?
You're already canceling it in just your very description.
That is from the Women's Fiction Writers Association. So I thank them for that.
It's just so genderist. It's just so wrong. Like, it could be anyone going through this. Okay, I'm sorry.
So, I mean, I feel like this definition just doesn't also match up with the connotation of what women's fiction is in society. Like, a lot of people hear women's fiction, they think, oh, it's chick lit, or it's books that only a woman would find interesting. And it's totally in a derogatory way.
I agree. I do think that it has a lot of derogatory. I also see it as some of those, to quote another person, like a girly, swirly, like, period piece that, that mostly when people put women's fic on it, they think it doesn't have a lot of emotional depth.
Yeah.
Which then goes and points to society anyway, saying that women's issues aren't emotional depth enough because we're so vapid and, like, surface.
There's that. Exactly. I agree. And that is why we are talking about it today.
In a horror sense. And that is why I was listeners, we're on point today, and we're doing great.
We had a super secret signal, and somebody, probably still distracted by Poor Things, forgot the super secret signal to read the ad.
Yes, she did. Okay, so today's episode is sponsored by a well-read tart. Are you tired of the book Hangover and wish that you could live in the story?
I feel like we shouldn't even do these anymore. At this point, this is just nonsense.
Well, CJ has a blog.
I have a blog.
You have a blog, and you not only review books, but you make recipes inspired by the books.
And you have a blog where you review books, and you also do developmental editing.
I do. I developmental edit books. I'm trying to make it more accessible for self-published authors. If you're looking for, someone that can help you, I help CJ. She's a raving review.
Indeed. Yeah.
You still owe me a review, woman.
Oh, shit, I forgot. You have to email these things. My brain cannot hold. If I do not get a tangible reminder, it just, gone.
Well, this reminder's living forever now because it is now in the podcast. But yeah, so check us both out. We have all the deets down below in the show notes. So I think that's what they call it. Show notes?
Yep, show notes. I've been listening to other podcasts and they say show notes, and I was like, aha, note.
Look at her. Look at her doing the research so that we can be the best podcasters for all of you.
Or just listening to the podcast I listen to when I fall asleep and barely remembering to it's show notes. Okay. And then just being asleep and hopefully remembering to tell you that it's show notes when I wake up in the morning 8 hours later.
Well, help support us, friends. Click the links down below if you need help or you want a recipe inspired by your favorite book.
Yes.
So,
Thank
that was
you.
it. You're welcome.
Okay. Done. Okay. So, back to our topic. There has been talk recently in the publishing industry about changing the term women's fiction because of what we were saying before. It's deemed outdated, it's deemed a bit insulting, it's reductive. It's just generally used to describe the type of book a woman might buy without giving any other details about the plot or type of story.
And we shall not be put down.
We shall not be quieted. And a lot of people just assume it means romance, which isn't true.
Oh,
Romance
hell no.
can be the focus for it, or actually it can be a subplot in it, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. And a couple doesn't have to end up with happily ever after, like romance genre actually requires. So while there can be romance, there doesn't have to be.
I can promise you, as a reader, I've never thought of chick lit. I've never thought of that as romance. Okay, so side tangent, because you gave me permission to do this, okay?
I did, yes.
As we were talking about all this, the book that pops into my head perfectly is what I would consider, it needs a new definition, but as women's fiction, is The Voices.
The Voices.
It's about the couple that buy the house and their kid goes missing.
Is there an emotional arc for the character?
Yes.
Was there?
I think so.
Okay. I do not remember.
You recommend this book to me. You don't even remember.
I recommended it like 2 years ago.
Maybe that's true. Anyway, it's what's popping in my head. Like, that to me would be an emotional arc story. But do we even need a genre for emotional arc stories? Okay, I'm skipping ahead, but go ahead.
So I wanted to talk about the term women's fiction because I first heard about the discussion about the term from the Women's Fiction Association and then also literary agent Carly Waters of PS Literary Agency. She also co-hosts the podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. She was talking about this topic in a panel at a writing conference last fall. And when I first heard it, I was kind of dismissive about it because I read women's fiction, I write women's fiction, I tell people usually that I do both. And so when I took this survey that the WFWA was sending out, I discovered some things about how I really feel about the genre that I love so much. And when I was first making my notes for this podcast episode, I wrote the topic of the segment as, quote, how I feel admitting that I write women's fiction. And I think that kind of says it all because I use the word admit. I admit to writing women's fiction. Like it's something I'm accused of or I'm guilty of doing. Like I'm confessing to something embarrassing or shameful. And I realized upon reflection that it is a little bit true, which is kind of sad. Like, Kate, have you ever been embarrassed to say that you write in the genres that you write in?
No, and as I said earlier, I do not write in, as the children say, a chooky genre.
What is a chooky genre?
I don't know. It's what the kids say when something's outdated, cheesy, overdone. I don't know. They say it's chooky. Like, at one point they said blonde hair was chooky. It's like, cool. People can't change that.
I mean, they can with hair dye.
Yeah, but like natural blondes.
They could still
change that.
No.
I guess.
Well,
would you change your hair?
Thank you for thinking I'm a natural blonde, but I am not. So I have changed it. I guess I'm a chooky all the way. That was the name of somebody's cat I knew when I was growing up. So that's why it's a funny word to me.
So no, I don't feel like I have to admit. Well, okay. In a book world, I don't. Oh wow! I just opened a box. You opened a box because
boom.
Now I think about. So when people ask me what I do, I first say I'm an artist, and they ask what my thing is, and I say what my creative mediums are, and then it proceeds to what do you write?
Yeah,
and then I have to tell them horror, sci-fi, and then I feel like a nerd that dresses up and goes to Comic-Con. So,
yep.
Okay,
yep.
Fine. Yes, okay. But in a book world, would I feel better? Okay,
see, if I am talking to women who I know are readers or they work in the publishing industry, like agents, editors, publicists, other authors, I easily can say that I write women's fiction. I don't get embarrassed. I don't worry that they may think I write cheesy novels that are ridiculous. I don't think that anyone can dismiss my writing as insignificant or silly or really easy to do. However, if I am talking to men outside the publishing industry, which means most men statistically, or women who I'm not sure are avid readers, I will say that, quote, I write in a lot of different genres: historical fiction, horror, foodie fiction, and women's fiction. Women's fiction will be tacked on last, almost as an afterthought, because even though I know what I write is quality, I worry that someone who hears the term women's fiction is immediately going to dismiss my writing because of the connotation associated with it.
Well, women's, like, whatever you say last tends to stick with people longer, so...
Oh, that's a good point.
Don't put it last.
Okay, maybe I should put it first. Maybe I should start putting it first.
But why can't we just call it fiction?
Yeah, I mean, like, for men's books, so we don't call, like, Dan Brown and Clive Cussler thrillers that are mostly read by middle-aged dads men's fiction. We just call them thrillers. And novels written by men about a male main character's emotional journey, like A Man Called Ove would be a really good example. It's not called men's fiction. It's not a man's fiction. It's just fiction, or a novel, you know?
Like Catcher in the Rye. That's another one.
Yeah, it's a novel. Exactly. But women writing about women's emotional journeys is women's fiction. It's very demeaning. And why does women have to be tacked on to the genre if it's just about a woman's personal journey? So the more I thought about it, the more it enraged me. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, since it's definitely weaving into different genres and weaving into the horror genre these days. And I was wondering if anybody else feels the same way about this.
Yes, this is call to action, listeners. Comment below about your own feelings on women's fic. Do you struggle to also admit that you write this outdated genre that should no longer exist? And how do you feel also saying what genre? Even if you don't write women's fic, how do you feel stating your genre in general?
And just to clarify, it's not an outdated genre, it's the outdated term for the genre.
Yes,
it's still very cool and hip to write women's fiction, I would just like to say.
Well, okay. I wouldn't say that it's cool and hip to write women's fic. I think it's cool and hip to write fiction. Well, the problem, like, what we're dealing with is an outdated notion that completely shows where gender roles and gender equality were back when the genre was originally created. Like, this is a thing that kind of slid under the cracks, that has been following the same old norms from, like, the 50s, say, or whenever it first was started. And we just now are catching up and being like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, wait a minute, we don't like this anymore.
Yeah.
Because there are problems with this. And I don't know, are there really that many people who even technically read women's fic anymore?
Yeah, I mean,
okay, Coring, I don't even see women's fic listed.
Oh, I see it all the time. I mean, because I'm looking for it.
Clearly. True. I'm just going to take that comment back and put it in my pocket. Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah, there are, I mean, I would say, I haven't read it yet, but that book, The Women by Kristen Hanna, that's historical fiction about the women nurses in Vietnam. I think that is a good example, or would be a good example of women's fiction. Because I think it's about their emotional journey.
But that's historical fiction in a novel. To me, okay.
And it can also be women's fiction.
So, I'm going to say a very unpopular thought, okay. I think. It's just, to me, I'm going to push off people. That whole area, that whole, like, what would be put under the, what do they say, fiction? What do they call it in Barnes & Noble? Fiction? The sign above it?
Yeah, just fiction.
That's all literary fiction to me. I don't ever go over there. Okay. So to me, it's like that's all literary fiction. No.
A lot of it's commercial fiction, too.
Well, what's wrong with commercial, then?
Nothing. I mean, that's one of the terms that they're starting to use. Like, alternatives for using women's fiction, people are starting to say book club fiction, upmarket fiction, contemporary fiction. It's still a little vague because it doesn't give you more of a sense about what is happening.
But why do we even need it? Okay, because if you're going to go say something like contemporary fiction, then you're not going to have to make a very different section in the bookstore with historical fiction then at that point. Because now, like, if you put the Kristen Hanna book, that is definitely a historical timeline, in the contemporary fiction section, everyone's going to be like, well, what is this? But also, why are you calling that book women's fic? I just think it should be fiction. It's just fiction. Yeah. Or do we need to get a little bit more detailed about dividing? I don't know. This is what we tried to talk about in horror genres too.
Yeah, I like upmarket fiction because it sounds fancier. You know, like book club fiction still has the connotation like underneath it of women only because mostly women are the ones who have book clubs.
Yeah.
So if you hear book club, you're going to think, oh, it's also just for women or chick lit. So upmarket and contemporary, I think, would be the best outlet. Because again, like for Man Called Ove, it's just fiction. It's about a man's emotional journey.
So then he would be contemporary fiction too.
Yeah. Yeah, and no one has to preface it, but like, well, this is a man's emotional journey just for men, but it's fiction, you know?
Women are the ones that read that book.
Yeah. And that's a good point also, actually.
So I really don't... I agree with the commercial, or contemporary fiction, and then which I think is a great idea, we make a historical fiction spot in the bookstore so that people like me can steer far away from it. I hate historical fiction. I'm over it.
You know, we just read, technically, historical fiction for this month's podcast.
No, we did not, because
we did.
No, not till next year.
Really?
20 years.
20 years?
20 years.
20 years.
All right,
we will cling to that then. We will cling to that.
Because you can't call something vintage until it is 20 years old.
Okay.
Shit. I did it again. I did it again.
What did you do?
20 years old would be 2015. God damn it.
No, that's 10. That's 10.
No, that's 20.
20
we did
years
it too.
Would be 2004.
15.
No. Okay. 2024. You're talking about that book. Okay.
The book we're talking about right now. It
takes place in 95?
Yes. So that would be 2015. They're right.
I'm using my calculator.
All the reels are right.
20,
We're fucked.
Wow. 2015. Yeah. I really thought it was now. 2025 or going to be now. Wow. Yeah, I can't do math. And wow, I am old.
We did it. We fell into the millennial. Oh, God. I'm having a breakdown, listeners. Send help. We did it. And I think we did this when we mentioned the book, too. We did
talk about it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. I mean,
Rally. It's okay.
I mean historical fiction because everyone's writing about the World Wars, and I'm over it. Yes. Right by a different time, I will read it, but I'm over the World Wars. I'm done crying. I'm done. I learned my lesson. I'm done. Do not teach me anymore.
I can't do the World Wars anymore.
I don't care about heroes anymore. I'm done.
Okay, so since she is done with everything, I think that we are going to wrap up this conversation. So, women's fiction, let us know what you think. Is this term outdated? Do you like it? Do you not like it, but you're not quite sure what it should be changed to? And do you also see how it's creeping into the field and the genre of horror? You know, there's so many more women horror authors these days. They're getting so much more publication time, so much more, you know, they're making their way into Target and bookstores. And I love a lot of the stories that I'm reading by them. So it makes sense that a lot more women's issues are trickling into horror as well. So I feel like this is going to become a pretty important topic, and we need to stop calling it a blend of, you know, horror and women's fiction, because it should just be fiction or something like that. So what do you think, listeners?
Yeah, my closing remarks and all that are going to be, one, I'm going to make a poll.
Okay.
And so Spotify has the poll, so if you want to go to Spotify, and I'm going to list all the options that we mentioned for naming it. Go vote on the poll which one you like the most. So was it contemporary fiction, upmarket, book club, all that. Or it should just be fiction.
Or just fiction.
Also, it shows you how much I have a pulse where I write and live in my pulse, because, to be honest, I didn't realize women fic was even a thing, and I thought that was like an early aughts title that they put on. Because do you remember that the author who did like Something Borrowed, and she had like that whole that to me would have been
women's fiction.
Yeah, and so when that series essentially ended and was over, and that craze like Devil Wears Prada, like all that was over, I thought women's fic was over, and it was just fiction. Like, you know what I mean? Because those were what I grew up with as women's fic. So yeah, so that's why when you were bringing this up, I'm like, it's still even a thing? Like, that's a thing? Yeah. I thought it was just books, fiction.
I'm reading a book right now called Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame, which I love. It's like Great British Bake Off in a book form, and it's about a 77-year-old woman who decides to enter the Great British Bake Off. And that is women's fiction. It's also foodie fiction, which I love, but it's definitely women's fiction. It's about her emotional arc and her journey and the relationships that she has with people as she goes on this emotional journey from being a unhappy or unfulfilled baking housewife to what I presume is going to be some level of fame and how she deals with that.
See, I just thought that was fiction.
Yeah, see, that's great. You're already ahead of the times.
But I also live in the other realm where there aren't any women, barely. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now I feel like really cheesy, like a Star Trek nerd going to a convention.
Because you say you like sci-fi and horror? Or
yeah, and I'm just staring at my background with all my, like, stuff. All right, anyway.
You like what you like. You don't need to be ashamed. That's the whole point, is you don't want to be ashamed, and we shouldn't be made to feel ashamed about what we write, what we like to read.
All right, listeners. Well, thank you so much for listening to The Dark Side of the Word, a podcast for all the dark story lovers. If you're listening on YouTube, then please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us how awesome sauce we are. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or iHeart, make sure to give us a follow, vote on the polls and comments, and help a friends out by spreading the word about this awesome thing. Also, forgot to mention, don't click off yet. You have one more week to join in for book club. We're reading Murder Road by Simone St. James. And make sure you've got it read and join in next week for the book club. Bye, friends.
Bye.